Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Riley Lewis Show. I am your host, as always, Riley Lewis. We have a very interesting I have a very interesting episode for everybody today. So I thank you for sticking around. Just really quickly, if you'd like to support me and support my content, please remember to hit that subscribe button down below. Subscribing to the channel really helps me out. You can also like this video and leave me a comment in the comment section down below to let me know how I'm doing. Okay, so let's get into the topic of today's episode. Really, today's episode is about a letter. This is a letter that was compiled by several academics and authors from the New York Times and other various sources, including Harper's. And this was a letter that was also signed by many cultural figures and important authors and writers and historians, including J.K. Rowling, including Noam Chomsky, the psychologist, including many other people. There's a very long list. Malcolm Gladwell. There's a long list of people who signed on to this. Again, academics, historians, writers, professors, cultural figures, anthropologists. There's a wide range of people who signed on to this letter, which is titled "A Letter on Justice and Open Debate," which was published on the Harper's organization website, which you can find online for free. It's also linked in a Washington Post article about the story. And really the headline context, just before we jump into this letter, which is a fascinating letter to me, is that, and this is something I've been talking about for some time now, we are reaching a place where the very progressives who say they want progress are also perpetuating a cancel culture that is inherently self-destructive. And we are literally watching the progressives slowly eat each other and collapse in like a star does at the end of its life cycle. I mean, what we are seeing right now is the ultimate. I mean, you reach a place where people are so partisan that they no longer agree within their own group. So there's that intra-group conflict and intrapersonal conflict, and we've reached a place now where people aren't hiding it anymore. They're just openly calling for the dismantling of the economy. These are people that want to dismantle capitalism. These are people who want to dismantle the government, who want to defund the police, but also want safe communities and better schools. These are people who I really don't think are well versed in history or economics or philosophy or political science at all, but nonetheless, we have a clear appetite for destruction in this country right now, and at this point, many people aren't even hiding it. I mean, and for the record, this is also really I want to point this out too. I think this stems in a great amount of hypocrisy that is not being talked about, but in 2011, Colin Kaepernick was all for hot dogs and hamburgers on the 4th of July. Happy Independence Day, everybody. Barack Obama was president. Now Donald Trump is president. He no longer has a job as a quarterback, even though he's had several opportunities to actually try out or have a practice session before every team in the NFL, which has turned into a publicity stunt. Nonetheless, this person who just 8 years ago was saying Happy Independence Day is now saying that we need to completely dismantle everything about America. Furthermore, we are now living in a society that is really like this. It's just rife with this quasi-Maoist guilt/struggle sessions that are really also you sort of complemented, if you will, by this Orwellian dystopia where there's a whole new speak, and we have to get rid of all the old language because it's tainted language and it's oppressive language, and we have to completely go to new speak, no more old speak, brand new words, brand new definitions, complete new speak. And I'm really scared that people at this point in politics, even at the highest levels, are literally defending people who are just trying to burn things to the ground. It's deplorable. I just can't believe it. In any case, there are a bunch of writers who finally are fed up and have had it, and they're finally vocalizing it. And no, these are not people who are just Trump supporters. These are well-educated writers who are in many cases on the left. Noam Chomsky, Malcolm Gladwell, Margaret Atwood, these are not Trump's base. So this is actually really refreshing to hear because it's like a sanity check. So the letter is called A Letter on Justice and Open Debate, and again, you can find it on the Harper's Magazine news website, or I'm sorry, just the Harper's Magazine website. But they have the full letter here, so I am going to take the time to read it because I think this is an incredibly insightful letter that really does a good job of illustrating the storm that we are in right now. I think that right now, if to take Plato's allegory, we are on a ship right now in very stormy seas, and in some ways it feels like nobody has their hands on the wheel of the ship. It almost feels like in some ways there isn't a captain. In some ways I very much do think that, that in any case, it feels like there is, at least to an extent, some sort of absence of leadership. And everything right now is up in the air, and everything is completely chaotic. And I think that the media is really doing a lot to stoke division. So I really think that they're doing an excellent job of stoking divisions. However, in an effort to actually heal divisions and bring about real progress, we have this letter. And again, this was signed by 150 different journalists, historians, activists, anthropologists, professors, academics. So these are not people that are just Trump's base. Now, enough preview, I should say. Let's just get into the letter. So the letter is broken up into 1, 2, 3 paragraphs here. So let's just go one paragraph at a time. I'll speak nice and slowly. Our cultural institutions are facing a moment of trial. Powerful protests for racial and social justice are leading to overdue demands for police reform, along with wider calls for greater equality and inclusion across our society, not least in higher education, journalism, philanthropy, and the arts. But this needed reckoning also has intensified a new set of moral attitudes and political commitments that tend to weaken our norms of open debate and toleration of differences in favor of ideological conformity. As we applaud the first development, we also raise our voices against the second. The forces of illiberalism are gaining strength throughout the world and have a powerful ally in Donald Trump, who represents a real threat to democracy. But resistance must not be allowed to harden into its own brand of dogma or coercion, which right-wing demagogues are already exploiting. The democratic inclusion we want can be achieved only if we speak out against the intolerant climate that has set in on all sides. So I have a lot of things to say about the first paragraph, but we'll just move on to the next paragraph. The free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted. While we have come to expect this on the radical right, censoriousness is also spreading more widely in our culture, an intolerance of opposing views, a vogue for public shaming and ostracism, and the tendency to dissolve complex policy issues into a blinding moral certainty. We uphold the value of robust and even caustic counterspeech from all quarters. But it is now all too common to hear calls for swift and severe retribution in response to perceived transgressions of speech and thought. More troubling still, institutional leaders, in a spirit of panicked damage control, are delivering hasty and disproportionate punishments instead of considered reforms. Editors are fired for running controversial pieces. Books are withdrawn for alleged inauthenticity. Journalists are barred from writing on certain topics. Professors are investigated for quoting works of literature in class. A researcher is fired for circulating a peer-reviewed academic study. And the heads of organizations are ousted for what are sometimes just clumsy mistakes. Whatever the arguments around each particular incident, the result has been to steadily narrow the boundaries of what can be said without the threat of reprisal. We are already paying the price in greater risk aversion among writers, artists, and journalists who fear for their livelihoods if they depart from the consensus, or even lack sufficient zeal in agreement. And now the final paragraph. This stifling atmosphere will ultimately harm the most vital causes of our time. The restriction of debate, whether by a repressive government or an intolerant society, invariably hurts those who lack power and makes everyone less capable of democratic participation. The way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away. We refuse any false choice between justice and freedom, which cannot exist without each other. As writers, we need a culture that leaves us room for experimentation, risk-taking, and even mistakes. We need to preserve the possibility of a good faith disagreement without dire professional consequences. If we don't defend the very thing on which our work depends, we shouldn't expect the public or the state to defend it for us. This is one of the most well-written letters I've ever heard, and this is absolutely spot on. Our cultural institutions are in their darkest hour right now, and the American people are the jury. Really the judge, the prosecution, and the jury. And what we do, how we handle this response right here, right now, will determine whether or not, I think, in large part, for the rest of our fate, whether or not we will be a resilient nation that is able to handle internal strife and articulate the needs of the moment and the people, and create reasonable, predictable, incremental change without major disruption. Or will we fall backward into the state of nature and become a more fragile state, where literally any single gust of wind would be enough to burn down the whole house? Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like the idea of burning down the house. I also don't like the idea of perpetual revolution every single 4 years. I also don't like the idea of perpetual impeachment or government shutdowns. So, if that sounds like you, if you don't like those things, then I hope that something in this letter reached out to you. And while there are parts of the letter that I think are really just, I think there are parts of the letter that are still catering to this baser instinct that we're seeing in some of these revolutionaries, and I can give some examples. But I think 95% of this letter, especially the end, is absolutely correct. Let me say those last 3 sentences again. Then I'll give my quandaries. I'll provide my quandaries with the letter, and then we'll call it a day. So, the last 2 lines go. Actually, yeah, the last 3 lines. The last 3 lines go. As writers, we need a culture that leaves us room for experimentation, risk-taking, and even mistakes. We need to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement without dire professional consequences. If we don't defend the very thing on which our work depends, we shouldn't expect the public or the state to defend it for us. So now let's translate those 3 sentences into the ideas that are really propping these sentences up. Sentence 1, we need to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement without dire professional consequences. In other words, if we want a democracy, if we want a republic, and we just want a plain civilization that works and functions, we have to be able to have healthy, good faith disagreements without questioning the motives or the circumstances of the person with which we are disagreeing. We also have to be able to be reasonable people who are able to coexist with people who do not necessarily agree with everything that we think, without saying that they should be fired, canceled, or banned. We can't just ban somebody every single time they disagree with us. I literally have had friends who watch Joe Rogan for several years, weekly, and then one episode, one day, one thing is said, and they go, nope, his whole existence is canceled, get rid of him, get him out of my sight, Joe Rogan is banned. That is not a recipe for anything more than anarchy and terribleness and the state of nature and fires, and you want to talk about brutality and living in a terrible, a failed state, a police state. I mean, I don't want to live in some state where every single time one person says one thing that somebody somewhere might not want to hear, their entire existence is erased. Just like that. So we got to stop it with that. We got to get over that. That's a bunch of crap. I mean, I'm sorry, but we got to grow up. We got to get rid of that. So that's basically what they're saying. You can't fire somebody because you don't like who they voted for. That's not fair. And if we can't expect to build a civilization on that kind of a mindset. So just number one. Now, the next sentence. If we don't defend, actually, wait. I'm sorry, I missed the first sentence. That's okay. The first sentence was, as writers, we need a culture that leaves us room for experimentation, risk-taking, and even mistakes, which is also totally true. And we see this in stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy is a great example. If we don't have people in society who are able to make jokes, who are able to push the boundaries a little bit in various directions without risking public shaming, public stoning, a witch hunt, having their life ruined, then regular ordinary people, we won't know in our lives, or culturally writ large, we won't know where the lines are. We don't know what's appropriate for humor and what's inappropriate unless we have people who are able to go out there and push those boundaries with new material. And those people are in many cases writers, comedians, performers, right? We have people who push things so we know where the line is. And that's a very healthy, good thing, I think. And if we lose that, then we lose the ability to know where the line is. And that would mean, I think by default, we all either just convert to newspeak, like in 1984, and we just get rid of all words and just burn all the dictionaries, or we just never speak again, because inevitably we are going to offend somebody. So we just can't live in this kind of world. And the last sentence they really mention here, I think is a great sentence to end on. If we won't defend, meaning the writers and the academics and the historians, if we don't defend the very thing on which our work depends, freedom of speech, open debate, we shouldn't expect the public or the state to defend it for us. So in other words, at some point you also have to stick up for yourself. So whether you're a historian, you're a journalist, you're an investigative, reporter or columnist, you're an academic, you're an anthropologist, right? You're a writer of some kind, you're a comedian, you're a performer. You have to be able to stand up for yourself and the very ideas that, again, not only built, maybe even in this case, your own work, but also provided the environment, the United States, the West, the world in which your work can be conducted. And I'm glad that so many people overwhelmingly signed on to this. Again, Noam Chomsky. We have many other people, but Noam Chomsky is a really big name. We also have Malcolm Gladwell, the very successful and very insightful author who signed on to this. Speaking of authors, also Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, and J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series. These are all very well-educated people who are certainly, at least mainstream American left, and they're certainly not Trump's base. And if they're concerned, then I think we should all realize that this cancel culture thing is absolutely very real and is literally jeopardizing the careers of artists, writers, performers, historians. I mean, it's ridiculous. And meanwhile, we're rewriting history with things like the 1619 Project, which has been widely criticized by historians for its inaccuracies. So I think this letter comes at a time that is incredibly important, and I'm very glad to see that people really are stepping in and saying something finally. That said, if you also are concerned, then please stay tuned, because I am working on my own piece, basically, that I think will be a great counter to the 1619 Project, called the 2019 Project. If we were to use the framework of Hegel's dialectic, Hegelian dialectic, the 1619 Project is the thesis, mine will be the antithesis, and then from there, hopefully more ideas and a real conversation, an honest conversation will be able to be rooted in the juxtaposition between the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones at the New York Times and my 2019 Project, which is something I will be working on this summer and also this fall as I start my program. Okay, that said, everybody, thank you for staying tuned for today's episode. I really appreciated it. I just really wanted to focus on this letter because I thought this letter was so powerful and so insightful about the cultural breakdown, the communication breakdown, and the sheer appetite for destruction that is engulfing the United States and the Western world and really the globe more broadly. So I just thought this was very, very important, and I wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to actually read the letter and give it another voice. That said, if you appreciate my content and you enjoy my stuff and you'd like to support me, please hit that subscribe button down below. Subscribing really helps me out. Each and every subscriber matters. Also, you guys are the reason why I'm doing this, so please hit that subscribe button and let me know that you're interested. Also, you can like this video or leave me a comment in the comment section down below and let me know how I'm doing. While you're down there, by the way, you'll find a link in the description of this video to my Patreon page, where you can sign up, become a member, and make a donation to my Patreon account, which would also be greatly appreciated. You can also find The Riley Lewis Show on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, and Anchor.fm, where you can donate to my Anchor.fm virtual wallet. You've been listening to The Riley Lewis Show. Thank you very much.